You mentioned Wall Street in your speech today, and Wall Street got booed. I'm wondering what, for you, the proper role of Wall Street is in our society.
Very different role. We need a financial system in which banks are making affordable loans to small and medium-sized businesses where they're part of the productive economy, helping us create jobs. What Wall Street essentially is a world unto itself, which has its own goals, coming up with incredibly complicated financial tools, and their job is to make a handful of people much wealthier. I think when you have so much concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few, I honestly believe that we should do what Teddy Roosevelt would have done. That's, you got to break them up.
Would the Dow go up in the Sanders administration?
I think when you have, yeah, it matters to me, but I think when you have a productive economy where small and medium-sized businesses are making profits, where people are working, yeah, I think the Dow will do just fine.
Okay. I want to ask you about some macroeconomic things. You've got some candidates talking about 4% growth. GDP is up a little bit, but under Sanders' administration, again, what would you aspire to for GDP?
Yeah, 4% growth. Well, you know, I think what we need, it's you can't pick a number to it. But what I believe is if we invest in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, we've got a $1 trillion bill that would create up to 13 million jobs. If we have a financial system that makes loans affordable to small and medium-sized businesses, I think we can substantially reduce unemployment today. We've got to also focus on youth unemployment, which I mentioned is just off of the charts. So my job is to, as president, is to create as many jobs as we can, and that's what we're about.
So if you did that, if you were elected and you passed the infrastructure you're talking about, education, all the things you're talking about, what would GDP be like? What would your goal be? What's reasonable for America?
What's reasonable for America is to substantially lower real unemployment in America and raise wages for people. That is what my focus is.
You want to spend a lot more. You want to raise taxes on some people. I'm interested in what you want to cut. What are the big items in the federal budget currently you'd like to cut?
Look, the truth is there is, as my conservative friends point out, a lot of waste in federal government, and we can run a much more efficient government. I find it interesting that the only major federal agency that has not been able to audit itself or have an independent audit is the Department of Defense. And what I can tell you is that virtually every major defense contractor has either reached settlement with the United States government because of allegations of fraud or in fact have been convicted of fraud. You have massive cost overruns. So one area that I think we could take a hard look at is the defense budget to make it a much more efficient operation than it is.
Are there any specific current weapons programs you'd like to eliminate or scale back?
Not at this, well, there are, but I can't.
Can you name one today?
Can I name? There are a variety of weapons systems that are designed to fight the Cold War. I think we spend too much money on nuclear weapons, for example. I do not believe that we need all of the aircraft carriers that some are suggesting.
What about the bases in Europe? Do you think we need as many bases and troops in Europe as we have today?
That's a good point. At a time when we have countries around the world and in Europe that are in many ways have a stronger middle class than we do, I think it is important to review the degree to which we have to defend countries whose middle class is stronger than ours.
Are there any specific bases overseas or in the U.S. that you'd like to see closed?
It's a good question. I can't give you a specific answer at this point.
Okay. Beyond the Pentagon, where I know you've just talked about maybe some cuts, are there any domestic programs of significant size that you'd like to see cut?
I think we have got to end subsidizing corporate agriculture, for example. That is an area that we will take.
Any specific sectors you would point out to say that's dairy, sugar?
Well, dairy, most of the way I would look at it is if you're into large corporate farming, you really do not need subsidies from the federal government. I am a supporter of family farms, not just dairy in my own state of Vermont, but I would like to see a strengthened and resilient family farm situation in America where people can maintain their family farms.
Under the 8 years of a Sanders administration, what would happen to the national debt? Would you aspire to lower it?
Sure. And you are looking, as you probably know, at one of the major deficit hawks in the United States Congress. The estimate is that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan will end up costing us somewhere between $4 and $6 trillion. I voted against those wars. I voted against the Medicare Part D prescription drug program written by the pharmaceutical industry. And also I have voted against many of the tax breaks that Bush and Obama have allowed the wealthy to enjoy. Add all that together, I am a deficit hawk. So the question is, yes, the national debt of $18 trillion is a serious problem. The question is, you do not do as the Republicans want to do, and that is move toward a balanced budget on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. You do ask the wealthiest people in this country to start paying their fair share of taxes. You do not go to war without paying for it.
Again, notion of being a deficit hawk, I understand what you're saying. I know you want to raise additional revenue, but you also want to spend a lot more. I know the Journal did a story that you dispute the specifics of, but there's no doubt you're for increased spending in a lot of areas, increased revenue in some areas. But yes. Would you in your first budget, for instance, submit a balanced budget?
No. You could not do that. But let me just say a few things. And the Wall Street Journal was dead wrong on a number of points that they were making. When you talk, they suggest that I think I'm spending $18 trillion over a 10-year period. 15 of that was on healthcare. What they forgot to say is that when we move toward a national healthcare program, the kind of program that exists in every other major country on earth, the cost per capita on healthcare would go significantly down. So yes, taxes would go up, but you would not have to pay private health insurance as an individual or as a business.
You say you're a deficit hawk, but then you just said...
No, I made the...
You said you're a deficit hawk, but then you said, of course you wouldn't submit a balanced budget.
No, what I said is, compared to my Republican friends who talk a whole lot about the deficit, who then go to war and don't pay for it, give huge tax breaks to billionaires, don't pay for it or offset it.
Yes, I am a deficit hawk. But I'm asking you about your view of the importance as a deficit hawk of, say you were president for 8 years, would you aspire to, year by year, bring down the deficit?
It depends on the economic situation. I think the deficit is an important issue, but I'll tell you what I think is a more important issue. What is more important is creating millions of jobs that our people need and rebuilding our infrastructure, making public colleges and universities tuition free, making sure that we do not continue to have the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. Those issues, in fact, are more important to me than the deficit, but the deficit is important.
Okay. Again, you talked about cutting defense, and you talked about cutting some corporate welfare or subsidies.
And I think there's a lot of waste in the agricultural department.
Is there anything specific you can point to there?
Well, we are subsidizing large corporate farming in general, and I don't think that large corporate corporations need our support.
All right, I want to finish asking you about some funner stuff. We talked a lot about policy. I did enough policy for you, right? All right, cover of Time magazine, your first time on the cover.
Yes.
I know every time I like to get a sense of whether you can actually get excited. Is this exciting to you?
Yeah.
Being on the cover of Time? Did you read Time as a kid?
Yeah, it was around me, and it was, we saw it, of course.
Yeah, so that's pretty good. Yeah. What else has happened lately that's been exciting?
What's happened is that we have really had some great meetings in South Carolina, in Iowa, other locations around the country. You just saw the meeting that we had today. I think what we are seeing is a great deal of enthusiasm and energy for a campaign designed to transform the way we do economics and politics in America.
When this started, you had a bunch of people working for you. You knew them all. You probably interviewed them all. I bet you now have people working on this campaign you never met, right?
Oh, absolutely.
What's that feel like?
Well, it's the way it is. One of the problems, and it's a very good problem to have, is that as our support multiplies, and as we have, hundreds of thousands of volunteers out there, we need a political infrastructure, an organizational capability that can mobilize those folks in an effective way. And that means hiring a lot of people. So we got a lot of people in Iowa, we got a lot of people in New Hampshire, we're hiring people in South Carolina, and we're going to be hiring people for Super Tuesday states as well.
What are the odds you're the Democratic nominee?
Getting better every day.
Okay. Last question. I interviewed a lot of people out front, people coming to your fundraiser day, and asked them, said, you're here for supporting Bernie Sanders, you don't support Hillary Clinton. Complete this sentence, fill in the blanks. Bernie is blank, Hillary is blank. How would you complete that?
Bernie has, throughout his political career, stood up and fought for working families and has been prepared to take on the wealthiest people in this country and the most powerful special interests. I'll let Hillary Clinton fill in the blank for herself.
All right. You should watch what your supporters said. Their answers were pretty interesting. Okay. I think you might have briefed them all before they walked in because they were right on message. Senator, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Good luck.